All right, so the story we're diving into today is about an execution. And yeah, it happened over 1,000 years ago, but believe me, it still echoes through poetry, philosophy, even religion. It's the incredible story of a man named Hallaj, and the whole thing, really, it all boils down to just three simple, world-shattering words. Okay, so picture this. The year is 922. We're in Baghdad, which at the time was the bustling heart of the Abbasid Caliphate. A huge crowd is gathered, and they're there to watch a mystic, a spiritual master, be publicly executed. Now, this was no ordinary criminal case. Not at all. This was the explosive climax of years of controversy, of fear, and a really profound spiritual clash. And these are the words at the very heart of it all. Al-Hallaj. This is what Hallaj declared, apparently while in a state of, mystical ecstasy. In English, that translates to, I am the creative truth. And just so we're clear, the truth is one of the 99 names for God in Islam. So you can see where this might get complicated. So to the authorities, this was it, the ultimate blasphemy. A mere man claiming to be God. But for Hallaj and his followers, it meant something completely different. So the big question is, how could three little words possibly lead to such a brutal public end? Let's unpack that. Right, so to really get why his words were so incredibly dangerous, we first have to understand the world he was living in. You have to understand, 10th century Baghdad was basically a powder keg just waiting to explode. The caliphate was juggling all sorts of problems, political instability, major financial crises, and you had all these different religious factions popping up. So into this climate walks this popular, kind of radical preacher, Hallaj, a guy who has hundreds of loyal followers. You can see how he'd be seen as a huge threat to the establishment. So who was this guy at the center of the storm? This man who could inspire such intense devotion on one hand and so much fear on the other? Well, let's take a quick look at the arc of his life. See, Hallaj wasn't some outsider, not at all. He was born right in the heartland of Islamic culture. He studied with some of the most renowned Sufi masters of his day, and he went on these massive journeys, spreading his teachings far and wide. I mean, his travels took him from the very center of the Islamic world all the way to the frontiers of India and Central Asia. So this wasn't some isolated hermit we're talking about. He was a major international spiritual figure. And that, of course, is what made him so dangerous in the eyes of his opponents. Okay, so now we get to the absolute core of the controversy. What did Hallaj really mean when he cried out, Inal Haq? And this is where you see two totally opposite interpretations. It's fascinating. On one side, you have the prosecution. They heard a man, Mansur al-Hallaj, claiming to be God, period. To them, it was an act of supreme arrogance, pure heresy. But then you have the mystics, and they heard something else entirely. They heard a man whose individual self, his ego, had been so completely wiped out in God's presence that there was literally nothing left of Mansur. In that moment, they believed it was God's truth just speaking through an empty vessel. Now, to really wrap your head around their perspective, we need to talk about a concept called tawhid, which means divine oneness. It's a fundamental belief in Islam, the idea that there's only one ultimate reality, and that's God. Everything else you see, it's all just a reflection of that one reality. For mystics like Hallaj, the whole point wasn't just to believe this in your head. It was to experience it, to feel it as a living, breathing truth. There's this amazing quote from the poet Mullakami that just illustrates the difference perfectly. He draws this powerful contrast with the Pharaoh from the Quran, who also declared, I am your Lord, the Most High. But here's the key. Pharaoh's I came from his ego. He saw only himself. Hallaj's I, on the other hand, came from the exact opposite place, total annihilation of the self. He saw only God, and in that vision, his own self just vanished. But look, Hallaj's teachings went way beyond just this one controversial phrase. What he was really preaching was a radical path of divine love, and man, did it challenge the conventions of his time. For Hallaj, the ultimate goal, the whole point of the journey, was to reach a state called fenafila, which literally means annihilation in God. Now, this isn't about physical death. It's about the death of the ego. You know, that little voice in your head, the I, that feels separate from everything else, separate from the divine. Just try to imagine being so completely consumed by the love of God that your personal identity just dissolves. And let me tell you, this kind of love wasn't some gentle, passive thing. It was a fire. For Hallaj, suffering wasn't a punishment from God, it was a bridge to God. He actually sought out hardship because he believed that in those extreme moments of pain and loss, the self gets broken down, and that's what makes room for God's presence to rush in. And what is just mind-blowing for a 10th century thinker is how universal his message was. He was basically arguing that all religions, at their core, spring from the very same divine root. He had this great analogy. He said that religious laws and rituals were like stars, super useful for navigating in the dark, but you wouldn't use starlight to try and find the sun at high noon. He was calling people to a direct experience of divine love, a path he believed was open to absolutely anyone, no matter what their specific creed was. Honestly, nothing captures his whole philosophy better than his final moments. Think about this. He's standing on the scaffold, about to be executed, and he doesn't curse his killers. He prays for them. He genuinely understood that they were doing this out of a sincere, even if he thought it was misguided, devotion to their religion. In his eyes, even his own execution was just another expression of the divine will. His compassion was just absolute. So why are we still talking about this? Why does the story of a man killed over 1,100 years ago still matter so much today? Well, his legacy is just immense and incredibly varied. For centuries, you had poets like Rumi, who saw him as the ultimate lover of God. Then, in more modern times, political writers have held him up as a symbol of rebellion against tyranny. He's also a foundational figure for major spiritual traditions all across Central Asia. And on a simple human level, he even became a kind of folk hero, the patron saint of cotton carders, which probably has to do with his family name. And that really brings us to the choice his story leaves us with. It's a question that's just as relevant today as it was back in 10th century Baghdad. So which path do you choose? The one that seeks to deepen life's meaning through the fire of divine love, even if it means you might get burned? Or is it safer to stand with the established rules and condemn the person who breaks them, even if they're reaching for a higher truth? Hallaj's story doesn't hand us an easy answer, but it definitely forces us to ask the question.